Welcome to Sounds of Resistance YouTube channel. The war between Ukraine and Russia has been going on for almost 7 months, and all units of the Ukrainian government and the entire Ukrainian people are fighting on all fronts against the troops occupying their country. The war between Ukraine and Russia continues not only at the front, but also in cyberspace, intelligence and spying. While the Ukrainian fighters outnumbered the Russians at the front, both on land and in the air, the Ukrainian intelligence units repulsed nearly 1,000 cyber attacks from the Russians every month. The Ukrainian intelligence is the guardian angel of the Ukrainian warriors both in the field of cyberspace, in the field of communication, and in the field of espionage. The Kremlin administration, which changed its strategy after the war became seriously risky for the Russians, began to send Russian Secret Service agents to Ukraine one by one. In particular, the Ukrainian Intelligence Agency, SBU, which cooperates with the Ukrainian Special Operations Forces, SSO, carries out very successful operations together and seizes even most trusted special agents of Putin. Tired of the pressure exerted by the Ukrainian army against the Russians in Donetsk, Kharkiv, and the surrounding regions, the Kremlin administration and Russian leader Vladimir Putin forcibly sent 2 Luhansk citizens to the Kharkiv region to carry out terrorist activities. The statements given by the 2 persons captured by the Ukrainian intelligence confirmed all this information. Russian leader Vladimir Putin, who repeatedly sought ways to put an end to the advance of the Ukrainian army in the last period of the war, this time assigned his most professional agents to collect critical information in Ukraine. The most elite spies of the Russians secretly entered the territory of Ukraine. These elite Russian agents began the observation process by getting all the information from the Russian intelligence teams that had been in Ukraine since the beginning of the war. In the beginning, these agents could easily share all the information about the Ukrainian army with Russians. Over time, Ukrainian Secret Service members devised a simultaneous covert operation plan against elite Russian agents who had caught the attention of Ukrainian intelligence. This week, Putin's top agent was captured in a raid by the Ukrainian Special Operations Forces. In the operation, such as the James Bond movie scenes organized by the Ukrainian Intelligence Agency and Special Operations Forces, the most important Russian female agent, codenamed 007, was caught and captured in Zaporizhia while observing all the secret information of the Ukrainian army and the locations of the Ukrainian soldiers. Putin's favorite female agent was like Katerina Rostova of the famous Blacklist series. It turned out that the Russian spy, Zavorozhsky, codenamed 007, who had been working for the Russians since the beginning of the war, was on duty in various regions of Ukraine. It turned out that the next task of the agent, codenamed 007, who informed the Russian administration about the reconnaissance and subversive activities in Zavorozhsky and its surroundings, was to communicate with the Ukrainian army to determine the places of deployment and movement of units of the armed forces of Ukraine. It was stated that this agent, codenamed 007, sent the coordinates of the Ukrainian army as well as data on the number of personnel and equipment of the Ukrainian army to the Russians every day. 007, who is still in custody, talked about the presence of many agents like himself in various regions of Ukraine. Ukrainian intelligence personnel accelerated their work on this issue and went after Russian agents. Facing a shocking development in the Donetsk and Kryvograd regions, the Ukrainian intelligence captured 2 Russian agents in these regions. The press service of the Ukrainian intelligence stated that the Russian agents captured in Donetsk also shared confidential information about the Ukrainian army with the Russian administration, as did the female Russian agent with the codename 007, was captured in Zaporizhia. Based on the testimony of these 2 Russian agents captured by the Ukrainian intelligence, the Ukrainian Secret Service members detained another Russian agent in Kropyvnytsky. It was understood after the statements received that all of these Russian agents who were seized by the Ukrainian Secret Service were working for the same purpose. These 3 Russian agents, who shared a number of Ukrainian army's war materials and the other routes followed by the Ukrainian soldiers with the Kremlin, are still being detained. Also last month, Putin's most private FSB spies were caught trying to assassinate Ukrainian President Zelensky in Kyiv. While the Russian spy hunting operation initiated by the Ukrainian Secret Service continued successfully, the number of Russian agents caught began to increase. The Ukrainian intelligence, which succeeded in destroying the agent network established by the Russian administration, also detained Yuri Ryabuka, the vice president of the Yaroslavl-built National Law University Legal Personnel Training Institute, on suspicion of treason. The Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office stated that Yuri Ryabuka carried out a lot of work in February and March during the war period to get Ukrainian soldiers to cross over the Russian side. Ryabuka was the deputy head of the SBU department in the Kharkiv region in 2018. Ryabuka, who was detained by Ukrainian intelligence teams, faces up to 15 years in prison for treason. All of the efforts of the Russian administration to take Ukraine down began to fall short. Day by day, people with whom the Kremlin came into contact with the Russians in order to realize its occupation policies began to come to light. An investigation has been launched against 223 people who have connections with the Russian administration. Ukrainian judicial units put 1,360 criminal cases in cooperation with the Russians to the judicial process. It was noted that most of the suspects in the criminal files worked in the Russian administrations and law enforcement agencies, and almost all of them went to Russia. Among the suspects in cooperation are the heads of educational institutions and teachers. Declaring that the influence of teachers on this issue is very dangerous, the judiciary of Ukraine underlined that the collaborative education personnel are trying to brainwash both Ukrainian students and their parents. The names that stand out in the files opened by the Ukrainian judiciary are striking. Ukrainian People's Party deputy Andriy Derkach, who is alleged to have received money from the Russian administration, is among those mentioned in the case file. Andriy Derkach is wanted everywhere on charges such as collaborating with the Russians, treason, and illegal enrichment. It was determined that Derkach received at least $567,000 from Russian law enforcement and intelligence agencies for subversive activities against Ukraine. Derkach also mentioned in many activities to discredit Ukraine in the world policy arena. Derkach has been involved in many treasonous operations, such as worsening diplomatic relations with the United States and undermining Ukraine's integration into the EU and NATO. The Ukrainian administration and the Ukrainian leader Zelensky, in addition to fighting against the Russians, continue their struggle with all the determination against the traitors and Russian agents in their country. The conditions of the war have worsened for both sides. The Ukrainian administration has moved to a much more advantageous position in this process. While most of the Ukrainian lands were under Russian occupation at the beginning of the war, 80% of the occupied Ukrainian lands have now been liberated thanks to the covert liberation operations and regional resistances carried out by Zelensky and his army. Most war analysts think that if US aid is delivered to Ukraine in sufficient numbers, the Russian administration will not have a say even in Crimea. Crimea is seen as the last trump card for the Russians can use to turn the tide of the war. The fact that both leaders stated that they're indispensable for this region is considered as a harbinger that violent clashes will intensify in this region. On the one hand, the nuclear threat posed by the Russians is confusing. The fact that Ukraine is one of the richest countries in the world in terms of nuclear reserves increases the dimensions of the danger. If Russia uses any nuclear weapons in Ukraine, it will be a violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, of which it is signed and ratified by the United Kingdom, the United States, and 40 other signatory states. Although no world leader is considering this option in the current situation, Putin entered Ukraine on February 24, 2022 for the purpose of invasion and violated the Budapest Memorandum of 1994 signed by Russia, the UK, and the USA, and in which Russia accepted the USA and the UK as the guarantor of the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Although the use of nuclear is a completely different dimension, Putin showed the whole world how crazy he is. We hope that Ukrainians and Russians will be freed from Putin's persecution as soon as possible, and Ukrainians will regain their freedom and territorial integrity. Thanks for watching.